Imposter syndrome says we're not authors.
But here's our books.
And here's our podcast. We are two book nerds talking about our indie author experiences
to spread the love of indie publishing and help other indies not feel alone.
Thanks for joining us, and now on to the show. Welcome back to another episode of Indie Book Nerds Podcast. We're your hosts, Jade Neoma
and Morgan Christensen. Today, we're excited to welcome our guest, Omari Richards.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Omari Richards is a debut novelist who specializes in sword and soul style epic fantasy. The Kimoni Legacy Initiation is his first novel. He is currently writing the Tales of Nahwalla short story series, Book 2 of the Kimoni Legacy, and a Black Mermaid urban romantasy novel.
And then a brief description of his book: 3 siblings of noble heritage, a great land under threat by an unknown enemy, and secrets with the power to destroy everything built. One choice looms over all who walk the land of Nahwalla: tradition or truth. Content warnings include descriptive violence.
Alrighty, Omari, thank you so much for being here with us today. So tell us what your novel is about in your own words, and when did it release?
So the Kimoni Legacy tells the story of, like the description says, 3 noble siblings, Kamau, Maslow, and Rizia. They are part of the powerful and influential Kimoni clan. And the story is basically Kamau, the middle sibling's ritual is interrupted. And when he goes to investigate, he discovers an ancient ritual. And that leads him down a rabbit hole into this massive conspiracy against their clan. And he tries to find evidence of this conspiracy in order to convince everyone that, something bad is coming. And Rizia finds out that her sisters are missing, so she decodes a message, a coded plea for help, and she gets closer to the conspiracy. And Maslow discovers their ancient enemies are getting more and more powerful, and he discovers the conspiracy. So the 3 of them are working in tandem to figure out just who is behind this conspiracy, who is arming their enemies, and what evil is down the line. And it's filled with magic, monsters, traders, and more.
That's awesome. It sounds so interesting. I also love the idea that there is a conspiracy, so they don't necessarily have all the proof yet, and it's just like this hunch that probably digs into each of them in different ways. It's interesting to see that you also had each of them play a different role in kind of achieving that like bigger goal. So tell us a little bit more about you. What is your writing journey, and what brought you to the writer that you are today?
I guess my writing journey started with my father, who was an English teacher in his youth. He always loved books, literature, comic books, oral storytelling. He was an oral storyteller himself. And growing up, I just kept hearing about different stories. He would give me different comic books. He introduced me to Spider-Man, Batman, Incredible Hulk. He would read the Bible to me, and he always made it really entertaining because he always framed it as like a superhero story because that's how he knew I would retain information. And then one day I just decided, oh, I really wanted to write something. And then I think it was second grade that the assignment was you have to write a story. And around that time, I was reading Call of the Wild with my brother. And then, so my very first story I wrote was The Lost Dog, which is like this half of a paragraph of a story about a little boy who loses a dog and then he finds it in like 10 sentences. So that was my first story. I got a check plus plus on it. And so after that, I was like, oh, this is really cool. I want to keep doing that. And kind of started the snowball effect that brought me here.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I wrote also a little book when I was probably in second grade too, and I still have it. And it was basically the rainbow fish, but somehow worse and somehow more like given to societal pressure and give away all your feathers to anybody who wants them because they don't like that you're unique and that you have something they don't have. So we grow as writers, through time.
For sure. Yeah, full disclosure, I was a horse girl, and so I wrote little stories and journals about all these different horse stories, and the classic like it's too wild and can't be tamed, but I can do it and win the big race. that sort of thing. So I can completely relate. And I love that your dad, being into English literature also included like comic books into like your reading. Because, I feel like a lot of people are like, it's mostly pictures. Like, no, there's like reading material in it. And some people prefer them to like overwhelming like novels. So,
Yeah, my dad is an interesting character in that he can find a profound message in just about any piece of literature. Like one time I was watching Bring It On with my sister, and then he came down and basically gave us a whole lecture about how Bring It On represents a perfect example of cultural appropriation. And so every time I hear about that topic, and I meet people who don't understand what cultural appropriation is, I just say, "Remember that movie Bring It On? Well, this is how that relates to that." So he could take anything, a comic book, a rom-com, anything, and find and articulate the thematic elements behind it. It's really cool to watch, honestly.
yeah, I mean, it proves his skills as a with the English literature because it's a lot of breaking down and analyzing and things. Well, that's so cool. Well, what inspired your book, Omari?
Several things. First, it was just I was big into fantasy, Lord of the Rings, Wheel of Time, Dragon Riders of Pern, Aragon, those kinds of stories. Redwall by Brian Shakes, that's a great fantasy story. Even though it's mostly about mice and rats killing each other, it's still really cool. Um, and then I think around like when I was 13 or 14, I was reading more fantasy, and then I just had this moment where I realized, huh, everybody's from England, or everyone is European coded. I don't see myself here. What's up with that? So that was in the back of my mind for a while, and then I read the second book in the Inheritance cycle in the Aragon series. And this was when Nasuda, a black woman, meets Aragon's cousin Rowan. And then after they're seen together, Rowan turns to Aragon and says, "Does she dye her skin?" And Aragon says, "No, it's just always that way." And then I remember reading that and I'm like, why are they acting like they've never seen a black person before? And then I thought about it, I was like, all right, because they live in the isolated mountains. NASA's people live in the desert. Their peoples don't really interact. And then I thought about it again. I was like, I don't see black characters in fantasy at all, though. Okay, I'll just write one. So that was kind of the initial thought process. Because as the saying goes, if you don't see a place for yourself, make a place for yourself. So that kind of got me started on this whole journey. It's like, okay, what would black fantasy look like? And at that time, I didn't really have a whole lot of examples. So it was kind of a learn as you go kind of process, but I'm really glad as to how far I managed to take it.
Yeah, we love hearing stories like that. We had another author recently. Her name is Callista Neath, and she was telling us about something similar. That she is Chinese descent, and so she was saying that she wants to see herself in these books. I experienced the same thing with wanting to see Asian characters in books. So there's nothing that like I love more than hearing that you didn't see what you wanted to see in the world, and so you were like, I'm going to put myself out there, and I'm going to make that space for myself. So we really appreciate that. We think that's really cool.
Absolutely. And like to speak because you can see me. Um, my fantasy does fall into that. Like I geek out about Vikings and like Norse mythology and anything to do with Scandinavia and stuff. So to like speak on like how in Aragon that separation between that black character being in the desert and Aragon and his posse being up in the mountains, because I completely didn't know about anything having to do with white default or not having that much inclusivity in fantasy, and so I got a sensitivity reader. I wanted it for other reasons, but she pulled out so much stuff that she was like, "So this is wrong, and I'm sorry, but none of your characters, their skin isn't described. am I to assume that they're all white? And I was like, well, I mean, yeah, and it's inspired by, Viking culture and Scandinavia. I do a lot of that, and there's a lot of like, uh, white characters and white people in Scandinavia. She's like, that's cool. Um, your book, your world is not Scandinavia, and it's a complete, um, it's a fantasy pulled from your brain. Like, it can have whatever you want. So, know that, and know that when the book hits your audiences, it might come off pretty not inclusive, which is pretty inherent of like Viking stuff and Viking culture, and there's a lot of white supremacy tied to that. So I didn't want that at all, and had I even wanted to include more um, diverse characters and ethnicities and skin tones into my writing, because like we gotta stop doing this whole thing where it's like, but it is European and they're based in Europe. Like, no, we don't have to do that, because there's literally magic also, and there's, like, try to pull something from Lord of the Rings. Like, there's this one ring. It's a ring. Like, just all the ridiculous stuff that you could put in, and you're gonna stop it right there. So, that's my whole rant and vent.
I mean,
So
so you need to add magic to justify diversity. It's just people travel. Like traders go to different lands. Actors travel to different places. People are displaced by
exactly,
war, refugees. Like
exactly.
humans rarely stay in the same place their entire lives. People travel, they make connections, they stay there, they grow, they create families. Like, it's not something you need magic to justify. Just like, hey, this group of people was here, something happened, they came over here, and now they're here, and they're part of the culture now. And that's all you really need.
Yes, that's exactly what my editor brought up too. And yeah, I can go on a whole vent, because the Vikings also traveled and met more people, and that was their whole point, was to go throughout the world. So yeah, I'll.
So much.
What was that?
I said the only reason we know about the only reason we know so much about them is because they traveled so much.
Yeah, I mean, my goodness. But I won't vent forever. I want to know what inspired the creation of Nahwalla and the Kitwana Savannah. Were there any real world places or cultures that influenced your world building?
I've always loved West African history and culture because my family and I were of Caribbean descent, and we managed to trace as much as we can back to majority West African countries, Nigeria, Mali, Ghana, Cameroon, Burkina Faso, etc. So I've always wanted to just learn more and more about those places, even as a kid. So I really leaned heavily on West African history and mythology because it's just really fascinating. Like I feel like African history is one of those unsung historical areas that people just kind of gloss over because it's filled with kings and warriors and scholars and queens and intrigue, betrayals, invasions, repelling invasions. Like all the stuff you see in Western European histories happens in throughout Africa, honestly. And so West African history really spoke to me, particularly the three major empires, the Ghana Empire, Mali Empire, and what was that other one? The Songhai Empire. So I lean heavily on those histories, and in terms of historical figures, Maslow is mostly inspired by Sunjata Keita, who was the founder of called him the Lion of Mali, and if you is his the historical epic attached to him. It's really cool. He fights an evil wizard who casts him out. The wizard brings down thunder. He attacks him with his lance. It's so cool. And then Rizia is based off of this intelligent woman, Nana Asma'u, who was the daughter of Usman Danfodio, who was the leader of the Sotoko Caliphate in northern Nigeria. And she was a poet, she was a scholar, she really spoke for women's rights, women's education. she witnessed several battles and recorded them for history, and she was this highly respected, highly revered woman. And I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. Because a lot of times in fantasy, the female characters I'm finding, they're either these really delicate and fragile damsels, or they go on the other end where they're these hardened badasses who have no emotions or whatever. And it's like there should be a middle ground here somewhere. So I really enjoyed adding that aspect of influence and power without it being tied to martial capabilities only, if that makes sense. And Kamau is mostly an extension of my own kind of, I guess you can call it millennial existentialism, because we graduated college and then the economy was nothing. There were no jobs, no one's getting houses. So we all felt like we were in this state of extended adolescence. So that's when I came up with Kamau, who failed his ritual. So now he's in this weird place where he's old enough to be considered an adult, but he didn't do the ritualized adult thing. So he's technically still a child. No one knows what to do with him. He doesn't know what to do with himself. So that was kind of the origin of that character.
Yeah, I we relate to the millennial existentialism. Don't worry, we definitely understand. I think that character so deeply already without having read your book yet. I also think it's really powerful the way that you use history to strengthen your characters and to give them like these really noble characteristics in some ways, and then also to add an element of like history through your books. And I think that you're like sharing that like love of African history that you have garnered throughout your life. And now you're putting it into these books so that you can spread this love to other people who may not, like myself, I don't know much about African history, but what I do know has always been really intriguing and really interesting. And I think that you're right that there's like this wealth of culture and history and all this like magic that's there that hasn't really been tapped into yet in terms of fantasy. So I love that you're taking that initiative and also using these like powerful people to inspire your characters as well. That's incredible. Tell us a little bit more about the magical elements or creatures that are unique to Nahwalla.
Sound we have. Um, I guess without going into too spoilery territory, because in the book, like magic is just kind of like hinted at with some examples, but we haven't really gone a full explanation of it. But it's mostly based off of spirits, because in a lot of indigenous African religions, the spirit world and the human world are basically side by side with each other. So a shaman or a holy man or a holy woman, because they don't really discriminate in gender in terms of who can call upon the gods. Unlike Abrahamic religions, where getting possessed is like this horrible thing, in indigenous African religions, getting possessed is basically the entire point of the exercise. So you call upon this god, this spirit, and you nurture your body in order to better house them. So when the spirit comes into your body, it feels at home and you can do all these great things. And that is more or less the basis of one type of magic in the book, where it's very based on creating a bond with the spiritual world. And then there's one system we'll meet later where it's about creating a bond with the natural world. And then there's another one we'll meet even later where it's about creating bonds with people. So the magic system is very based off of creating and maintaining these bonds, and through those bonds you can do these great things. And in terms of mystical creatures, there were mystical creatures, but in the backstory some stuff happened, and now they're pretty rare. But there is this one creature that pops up called the Ladimo, which is a sort of mixture of a zombie slash some kind of possessed person slash person who is addicted to a type of drug. And the Ladimo comes from a story they tell within the world about a hunter who went after this witch, and then the witch put a curse on the men that if they kept pursuing them, they would run into a monster. And then, of course, the guys were like, that's nothing. But then the more that they pursued the witch, the more they succumbed to hunger, the more they succumbed to thirst. And then eventually they started to eat each other. And then the witch came and reanimated their corpses, and now she has an army of monsters at her disposal, and those are the Ladimo. So that's like a brief glimpse of the kind of stuff you will find in this book.
That's awesome. I think hearing you describe your magic system is really, really unique. I don't think that I've heard of magic systems that work quite in the way that yours does with the spiritual world and like keeping those bonds. And I think it goes to show you, I know that basically everywhere you go spirits are different. Like when you talk to someone from America, the way that they describe like ghosts or spirits is going to be different than if you ask someone in a different country. So it's really interesting that they view it as like you keep your body, like you take care of your body so that you can house the spirit better. That was really, really interesting to me. That kind of like stuck out as something that I was like, wow, how would that work? And like strengthening those bonds between them and like the spiritual world. And then you mentioned like strengthening those bonds between them and like the natural world. So I'm really interested to see how that also like unfolds throughout your books. To continue more into the amazing elements and world that you've built, tell us what made you choose a botched ritual, the monsters and demons, and to make the characters siblings.
Sibling aspect come from my own connection with my two other siblings. My parents called us the three blind mice or the three musketeers if they were feeling particularly affectionate that day. Um, just that we basically had our own subculture with between the three of us. We had a shorthand with each other, and we're all like, and the three of us are like really different. My sister, who is the eldest, she's very administrative. She's very type A. We're going to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And if this doesn't work, we're going to do one, two, three, four, five, six. And then my brother, he's very physical. He played all the sports. He was a charismatic one. He basically understood people, and I was a quiet introvert who was more creative. But we all had our own adventures. We all had our we in a lot of ways we could understand each other in ways that our parents couldn't. So sometimes, like when we said something, and our parents didn't get it, like my sister would say, "Oh, he actually means this," or my brother would say, "Oh, she actually meant to do this thing, but you did this thing, so now she did this thing." So that kind of influenced like creating Kamau, Maslow, and Rizia because a lot of times in fantasy, when you have sibling characters, they're almost always at odds. Now that I think about it, it's always the brother who is the heir, and then his jealous half brother who wants the throne, and then it's always like this back and forth Cain and Abel dynamic. And I really can think of stories where the siblings actually have healthy, supportive relationships with each other. And if I could think of them, that was a very low number. Like right now, I think the only mainstream one is Game of Thrones with the Stark children, and they're all scattered and they barely have scenes together. So I really wanted to have a book where the sibling dynamic was like front and center. They love each other, they support each other, they help each other out, they complement each other. And for Nahwalla, that really came from all of my research from West Africa because there's just so much of it. There are so many ethnic groups, religions, languages, stories, mythologies, that when it came time to actually create worlds and to create cultures, I was like, okay, what if this aspect of Maasai culture came in contact with this aspect of Mandinka culture? Or what if this aspect of Dogon culture interact with Fulani culture? And then I just kind of went from there and just mostly tried to make it as much of my own as possible. So if someone from Africa reads it and they're like, "Oh, this is what you think of the Fulani people," it's like, "No, no, 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 no. I just took this one element and I changed this thing." So
Yeah, that sibling stuff hits really good because me and my brother, I mean, you have your little sibling like disagreements, but we've been pretty tight like all of our lives. And in fact, I'm going to see him after this interview. So I can feel that. And there isn't really a lot of like nice sibling stuff. You have like a lot of the rivalry and Thor and Loki kind of a thing, though Thor and Loki do kind of eventually are okay. I don't remember. I didn't watch them all the way through. But yeah, you still kind of get that. So it is nice and it's refreshing when they respect each other and they might josh each other, but they don't like inherently hate each other as most of the media makes siblings out to be. Um so to go on to the next question, how does the idea of tradition versus truth impact each of your characters? Does each sibling face a different challenge based on this?
So tradition versus truth just kind of comes from once again the just from the research aspect of it because one of the reasons that traditions are held is because it creates this cultural identity. We are these people because we do A, B, C, and D. But if we do X, Y, and Z, we're not this group of people anymore. But then as I was reading more about these cultures and how, societal change eventually comes up, there's always that issue where the longer you go within the culture, you realize, hey, we do A, B, and C, but when we do that, we hurt these people over here. And to these people over here, A, B, and C is actually very harmful. Should we do something about that? And then the society sometimes just kind of reinforces that no, we do A, B, C, and D no matter what. And it's like, but the truth of the matter is that is harmful over here. So we kind of have to do something about that, don't we? And then, it's always this push and pull dynamic. Like even if it's something as simple as young girls going to school and getting an education. I was reading this one book, The Girl in the Fig Tree, about a girl who ran away from female genital mutilation ritual, and it was in the Maasai culture. And she explains how it was traditional in Maasai culture for this to happen to young girls, but she and other people saying, hey, the truth of the matter is this is harmful. It causes a lot of health problems and it causes complications in childbirth. So it was all about her own push and pull within that culture, within that society, to make them see past their traditions and see the truth and realize you can have your traditions without it being harmful. So that was mostly the onus of the tradition versus truth theme because I think that's something just about every culture, every nation kind of has to grapple with, including America. We have gun culture, and people are hell bent on keeping gun culture, which is fine. But there are certain aspects of gun culture that hurt a lot of people, and that's the truth of the matter. But then there's always that push pull where it's like, but this is our culture. This culture hurts people. It's our culture. So it's like, it's basically how do you navigate and how do you move forward within that dilemma?
Yeah, no, that hits hard, like really. Like a lot of things in American culture, right? We can't speak for too many other countries, but yeah, that hits, and it's something that I feel like in your book you can navigate as well and kind of show and easily digestible, and like we can apply that concept in a lot of other things. So that's awesome. Um, well, what was your favorite scene or dialogue to write?
Favorite scene or talk?
Or dialogue?
Yeah. Favorite? Okay. I have a couple, but one of my favorite scenes is near the climax where Kamau has to convince someone I can't go too much into the context because that'll be spoiler territory. But the basics is Kamau has to convince someone he really admires, someone he really looks up to, not to attack this person who is undergoing, let's call it, a very reluctant transformation, and Kamau has to convince this person without fighting them not to attack. And I really enjoyed that scene because it was a challenge both for the character and for me as the author because I love writing fight scenes. I love action scenes. Throughout the book, you'll find several really fast-paced action scenes, and I've realized that's kind of my crutch where if I need to move a scene forward or I need like character development or something really cool to happen, it's like, okay, let me just throw in a fight scene with Maslow and this guy, or Kamau has to run from this guy and fight this guy and that kind of thing. But when I got to that scene, I realized that really wouldn't work for the story. One, in terms of pacing, because by that point, Kamau already had a climactic character defining fight scene. So to have another one would be very redundant. But secondly, character wise, he wouldn't want to fight this person, but he wouldn't want to have this person kill this transforming person either. So Kamau, who grew up in this martial environment where, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say they're bloodthirsty, but they are very martial minded, where the first solution is always, arming yourself, spear, shield, machete. You go out, you defend yourself, you defend your family, all that stuff. That's the default solution. But now it's in a situation where the default solution isn't going to work. The traditional solution isn't going to work. So he has to figure out a way to circumvent that tradition in order to save this person. So that whole dynamic of trying to figure out how is he going to do this was really great for me to write.
That's awesome. Yeah, I like how you took you like you said action is kind of your crutch a little bit. And so it was interesting to hear how you navigated wanting to lean into the action but knowing that it wasn't going to work for the story, it wasn't going to work for like what you wanted to tell. And so I love how you were able to flip that and actually make it like a really impactful scene, but also for like you as a writer to learn how to like tell that sort of story without using action per se. So that's really interesting. Tell us about a difficult scene or dialogue to write.
Difficult scene or dialogue to write. Anything with Rizia, because you find when you're a writer, and I see memes about this all the time, when you write characters who are supposed to be geniuses, you have to think like a genius. So when the smart character is put in a situation and they have to come up with a brilliant idea to get out of it, you yourself have to come up with a brilliant idea to get them out of it, and you have to frame it in a way that it actually makes sense as to how they could get to that conclusion. And also, Rizia is the exact opposite of the kind of characters that I feel comfortable writing. She is a 13-year-old girl with no martial abilities and no magic. Her only strengths, her only abilities are her intelligence, her charisma, her empathy, her insight, and her knowledge of history. And put those things all together, and you basically have a character who can't fight, she can't use magic, she can't even use like stealth or anything. So it's always a challenge, a very fun challenge for me to figure out when I put her in these situations, how is she going to reason? How is she going to, yeah, how is she going to reason her way out of it? Like in one scene, she's being chased by a guy with a machete, and her bodyguard is nowhere to be found because she snuck out of the castle to investigate a clue. And it's like, oh, shoot, I don't know how I can help you here, girl. So I basically have to come up with ways for her to, use her knowledge of history, use her knowledge of cultures, use her knowledge of people to navigate her way in and out of danger. But it's always a struggle. Like her chapters always took me the longest to write. But they were fun because, like I said, they really challenged me as an author to not just rely on fight scenes all the time, because it wouldn't make much sense for her to just suddenly pick up a sword, start doing quadruple backflips off the wall, and decapitate her enemies when she's in danger. It's like, when did that happen? That doesn't make any kind of sense.
Yeah, I think I have experienced kind of similar things when I put my character, like I gave her this really great power, and it's so cool. And that comes with so many limitations and so much difficulty because I have to be the one to figure out how to apply those magical powers, or in your case, how to apply not having magic and not being able to fight and having to use her intelligence instead. And brilliant her way out of a situation can definitely be hard when you are the author yourself. I also love that when you were listing her strengths, strengths, you listed empathy. I love that that is a strength of hers. I don't think that most people would regard empathy sometimes as a strength, but I love that that's something that you admire about that character. And to tell us a little bit more about like the siblings themselves, how did you approach writing their dynamics?
Honestly, in like the first two drafts, there weren't even siblings. It was just Kamal's coming of age story. And then, so within the first draft, which I don't think I even finished, honestly, he inherited his position from his brother Maslow after Maslow died in battle. So Maslow was just a posthumous character in the story who Kamal thought about all the time, but wasn't in the story in and of itself. And then as I was writing that draft, I kept thinking something's really missing here. And then I kept writing about Maslow and who he was, who Kamal's brother was, in order to better contextualize Kamal's insecurity in his position because his brother was so great. How am I supposed to live up to that? And then as I was writing, I was like, man, his brother sounds really cool. I wish he was still alive. And I was like, oh yeah, I can make him alive. So that immediately changed the dynamic because of Kamal just chasing the shadow memory, his brother is alive and well and still revered. So now his brother is an actual living person he can compare himself he can compare himself to and interact with. So that just adds to the dynamic because we can see Kamal from Maslow's perspective too, as opposed to just seeing Maslow from Kamal's perspective. And then as I was writing that new draft, I was like, well, this feels very testosterone heavy. I feel like I need some kind of feminine energy in between them just so that it's just not a bunch of guys going out and fighting and doing magic stuff. So I started developing a princess character, but then I kept running into the problem of either making her too delicate or too rugged. And then originally Rizia was supposed to be this runaway bride that the boys have to go and bring her back because their marriage was supposed to end a war. And then I really created I really honed in on their dynamic when two scenes happened. Maslow caught up to this version of Rizia, and then she was saying how it was unfair of society, of people to just shoulder her with the burden of ending this war when she herself had barely lived. She barely talked to anybody outside the castle. She barely knows anything about this world that suddenly she's burdened with saving. And how is that fair? And then Maslow responds with, well, how is it fair that I have to watch all my friends die and you're telling me you don't want to end it? So that whole conversation just created this whole new dynamic between them. I was like, oh, I don't think any of you are wrong, and I don't think either of you are right. Huh. So that created that dynamic. And then as I was going moving forward through the story, the more I was researching and the more I was coming from my own personal experiences, I realized there's no way their African mother would let her daughter just suddenly run off on her own without immediately knowing about it. And there's no way she would talk back to her mom the way she is now. That created another dynamic where Rizia is really smart and she has all these opinions and she can voice them to a point. So that so and so her only safe space are her brothers who won't really blast her for having different ideas and they actually enjoy her ideas. So that's basically how the whole sibling relationship came to pass.
That's sick. Yeah, I love all that. And like I can totally vouch. Sometimes my brother is like the only, well, not the only, but a safe space to be able to be my authentic self and him me and vice versa. So I can feel that as well. And it sounds really cool that like it's basically writing and development, and story development. Your characters sound like they run the show in a way, but like how they interact and how you go, oh, well, it doesn't necessarily have to be this way. I could change it. But so again, it sounds like they run the show and that their dynamics kind of collide, and it sounds really good. That and your thought process and all the writing, like awesome.
Sometimes I do wish they would let me run the show sometimes
I know.
because it
Yes.
took me 15 years to write this one book. So now that I'm looking at the sequel, I just have to sit them down and be like, okay, guys, we cannot let the readers wait another 15 years for us to get this together. Let's follow the outline, let's do what we plan to do, and we can all behave accordingly. And of course, they haven't done that at all because in the sequel, I add another point of view character because she just had to be heard.
For sure. Yes. I write super fast. Like, I'm editing book two, but I'm also drafting book four, and they're all like revealing themselves in a way where I'm like looking back at book two and I'm like, oh, like, were they maybe a little crazy? Me and Jade, I was just asking Jade about something a beta reader said, and I'm just like, oh, but would she really do that? Is that really stupid? Maybe I should like change that or something. But all in the great works of our writing. So much fun. Well, we've already talked about was it Rizia a little bit? Which character, maybe besides her, if you want to elaborate on her tough she was, which character gave you the most trouble as an author?
Oh boy. It's well, Rizia and a couple of the villains because everything is rooted in conspiracy, it's not it everything is subterfuge, everything is hidden. Everything is like hidden behind agents who work for this agent, works for this agent. So it's not a matter of like, Sauron is coming across the Misty Mountains or something with a massive army, and now, the enemy's out in the open and we all have to band together against this one visible enemy, or it's not, the unworthy King Joffrey is on the throne, so we all have to unite against Joffrey. Everything is like really scattered and seemingly isolated, and the villains are don't fully reveal themselves until near the end of the book. So writing those villains without them being out in the open, especially in fantasy, was pretty difficult. So I had to basically write proxies for them, and then I had to come up with, okay, how is this proxy that Kamau faces related to the proxy that Maslow faces? And now Ritzia just found their communication. So how does that tie into what Kamau and Maslow just ran into? And how does this tie into the larger conspiracy? And then it's just like this whole web that I not only have to build, I have to, I have to like unbuild it with the characters as they find out more about the conspiracy. So that was definitely the hardest part. Like it's gotten to the point where I can't even tell you who the villains are because that gives away the conspiracy. So, and every time I'm writing and I'm having a hard time with these scenes, I always ask myself, why is this so hard? And then my wife had to tell me it's because you wrote the characters who are experts in subterfuge. So of course they're not going to reveal themselves fully to you all the time. I was like, yeah, that makes sense.
That hits. Yeah, I have I'm navigating a villain next half of my series where it's like they need to not quite reveal themselves either. So I understand that. And not only do you have to keep up with like the web that you've created, but that I'm sure you also have to like again like kind of just remember also like there's the balance of keeping your characters like keeping them to themselves if that makes sense, like making sure that they're still themselves while figuring all this out and keeping all this information and finding all these things. So that is a thick it's like the staple of epic fantasy because we've got a whole world going on and we got to keep up with it. Well, Amari, what is your typical writing routine or creative process? Like, is there any kind of like something you gotta do before you sit down and, hack out some words?
cry for 20 minutes when I see a blank page. Um, no, but usually I just either go into my office and put on headsets and just listen to music. I used to listen to a lot of anime soundtracks, the Cowboy Bebop soundtrack, the Inuyasha soundtrack, a couple Dragon Ball Z songs. But I was finding that that wasn't really matching the mood of what I was writing because when I listen to like, Dragon Ball Z music, everything's like really kinetic. It's always very like fight heavy. It's like really flashy. So that doesn't really work when I'm writing like Rizia's more slower introspective scenes. So then I tried to listen to, the Lord of the Rings soundtrack and other traditional epic fantasy music, but then I was finding that the characters were sounding more like the Western European inspired characters instead of African characters. So I was really struggling with trying to find music that set the tone. And then I found West African musicians like Sona Jabarte, Ali Fakara Torre, and Omu Sangare. These are all masters of Wasulu style music, which is basically like it's almost like a precursor to the American blues almost, and it focuses on like the kora, stringed instruments, and when I listen to that music, I can suddenly I'm in Nahwalla. I can feel the grass in my toes, I can hear the different languages, I can see the different colors. So everything just clicks. And if I don't have that music, everything is just in black and white. So I definitely need that music when I'm writing. Yeah, as long as I have that music, I think I can write just about anywhere because I've been in my desk all day at some point, barely written 50 words, and then I go to the library and then I read and then I write 2,000 words. So I think the music for me is the most important part rather than location.
Yeah, I am definitely someone who writing is like it depends on the music. It really does. And so there are some times where there's a certain song that's working really well for the moods, and then I have to put it on repeat and I just listen to that one song over and over and over. And then there are other times where the song ends and I don't even notice and I'm like still writing and then I realize I've been sitting in silence for like 30 minutes. But for me, I have to be at my desk. I can't be anywhere else. So I am very jealous of the fact that you can like even go to the library or just go anywhere else. I am handcuffed to my desk if I want to get any writing done. But tell us a little bit about your publishing plans for the future. What's ahead for your series? And then I know you have another book that you're working on too, the
Yeah.
Black Mermaid.
Yeah, so working on book two now. That's kind of a slower process because the book is so dense and I have to, like I said, keep track of the web and everything. But hopefully it won't take another 15 years. Um, I am, yes, and I'm working on a urban romantasy about a black mermaid named Kiani who comes to the surface in search of a treasure, and she finds that the treasure is in the possession of this guy named James. And then together they embark on this grand adventure to figure out what is the story behind the treasure. And of course, they fall in love along the way. So that is proven to be really fun because it's a slightly different genre, and unlike the Kimoni Legacy where the focus is the world and its politics, this story it's strictly the core of the story is the relationship between James and Kiani, so that's been really fun to write. And I've also am working on two short stories, one of which is going to appear in the anthology, the Melanated Magic and Melanin anthology. That's coming out February 18th, I believe. So pre-order today. Um, and yeah, I think that's it in terms of future projects, because if I had any more, my brain would explode.
Yeah, well, if you need ARC readers for that mermaid story that I'm volunteering, I volunteer as tribute. I definitely want to read that. And also, I saw that post about the anthology, and when I was like, oh, Omari's on that, I got to buy it. That's an automatic buy. So tell us what made you choose indie publishing specifically, and maybe why you didn't go the traditional publishing route.
I think the book was just way too long for any traditional publisher to even touch it. I think when I ended it, it was I tried to fit it within the 120,000 word count that traditional publishers give you. And when I got to the end, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. There's still so much left to tell. So my wife, my girlfriend at the time, told me, well, just, keep writing it, get to the natural end that you want, and then try to edit it down. I did that, and it was 300,000 words. So I cut that down to about maybe almost 180 words. So I was still over. And then I went to some editors, like three editors, and they all told me the same thing. The story ends too abruptly. You leave too many elements left unexplained. You need to add more stuff. And I was like, you want me to add more, not less. I just want to clarify on that. You want me to add more, not less. And they're like, yes. I was like, okay, got it. So, yeah, and then I realized the more I read into publishing, um, the more I would have to give up creatively because I would have no say about the cover. I would have no say about how it was even marketed. I would have to cut out scenes that I thought was really important. And it's not just like, every scene is precious to me, every scene is my baby. It's like, no, like if you cut out this scene, if you cut out this character, the thing that happens in the climax doesn't make any sense. And yes, I could rewrite it, but it's not going to have the same impact. So I chose indie publishing because it's just freedom, I guess. It allows me to tell the story to its fullest potential, and it lets me tell the story the way I want it to, and it succeeds or fails based on my own merit and my own effort. So that's something I wanted more than just the access or just promise.
Um, yeah, that all speaks because there is so much creative freedom in indie publishing, and yeah, I also couldn't. I mean, I did try the traditional route just because I thought I couldn't afford the editors and the cover art and all the things at the time. Um, so you know it would be hard to give up any kind of creative freedom when it's like this is the message I have and this is my story that I want to put out into the world, not anything that a traditional like a publishing house would call marketable and be easier for them to put on their shelves. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you know um it's just not what I assume we're all indie authors. That's not what we want to do. um I mean, you talked about it a little bit, but we're gonna go into our favorite question on the podcast. What does indie publishing mean to you?
It means that, well, I'm sure you've heard this before, but it means just creative freedom. It means that I can just be unfiltered. I can tell the story exactly the way I want it to be told. And I can sit comfortably and say, this thing that's out there, it's exactly the way I want it. There's no asterisks. There's no, oh, I want to do this, but the publisher said this. It's like, no, this is my 100% fully authentic story, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And if it succeeds, if it fails, that's fine because I know that it's just 100% me out there, 100% my intention. That's what indie publishing means to me.
Yeah, I can agree. Again, like the authenticity and being able to say that's my story, whether or not it flops. Because I did have someone, so encouraging come up to me and go like, "Well, what if it flops? Like, what are you gonna do when, if and when no one buys your book?" These characters won't leave me alone, and this is a story that I don't care. I want it out there, and it's available to those who can reach it, and it's clearly there for a reason. These freaking characters won't leave me alone. I've done it, so, and it is so authentically, uh, I feel like I can speak for Jade on this here. Like it's our story in a sense. Little elements into it. Not that you know, not that Jade has cool fate weaving powers, or not that I endured like Viking raids and battles, but or not that even yourself, Omari, have done spear fights and magic things and battles, but like it's there. I'm sure there are things that are trickled in that are like your story. I mean, you've talked about your siblings and stuff, and how that's trickled in. So, and I do love that about our books and stuff. That there's no like nobody that can change that in our stories, really. So, well, to go into the most lovely parts of indie publishing, what are your biggest obstacles when it comes to publishing your book, specifically after it's written, and like the whole indie publishing process? What was there anything that, got in your way that you overcame?
Two things, money and exposure. Um, because as great as any publishing is in terms of having to say about the cover art, the interior design, and the editing, you kind of have to pay for all that. And so just being fully transparent, just finding the funds to get this endeavor off the ground was probably the biggest challenge and most likely why a lot of indie publishers don't make it out the gate. It's just it's expensive, and I can see why publishers only pick up certain books at certain times of year from a certain number of authors because it's yeah, it there is a high price tag towards just about everything you need to do. And yeah, and there are really no shortcuts. Like people try to circumvent it with AI nowadays, but that's not really tracking with people. So you have to find a way to just find the funds and really do it if that's what you really want to do. And of course, exposure. As great as TikTok and Book Talk has been, it's just, every time you scroll, it's like, buy this book, buy that book, buy this book, buy that book, buy that book. And you just have to, especially when you're doing it on your own, you have to work especially hard to make your book, your story stand out to people who are probably already overstimulated with the amount of books that are out there. I mean, we all love the idea of being surrounded by books, but we still have to read all those books. So, and it's very easy to get for books, especially like for books to get lost in the shuffle, especially now that the bigger publishing houses have more money and resources at their disposal for that exposure. So, the biggest challenge I'm finding lately is just, garnering interest, keeping interest, and just, getting that interest to translate to sales. So that's always been my biggest challenge. It's going well so far, but it's and there's really no end to it. You always have to keep marketing your books. You always have to keep it out there. And I imagine even after book two is out, I'm still gonna have to market book one because what good is book two without one? So money and exposure are my two major challenges.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% that those are some really like difficult obstacles. I realized, I think this is something that I told Morgan, which was I didn't realize how difficult it would be to market a book until I had already published it. So I knew it was going to be difficult leading up to it. Like I think I had it in the back of my head always like I'm going to have to keep marketing and it's going to be difficult, but I didn't realize how difficult until the book was out. And then there were like, I've already had months where the maximum amount of sales I've had is 6, which is still amazing because it's still 6 people who went out of their way to buy my book. And I'm very excited about that. I just think that there's a lot of pressure, especially if you're friends with a lot of other authors. You might see them say like, oh, today was I had a really low month this month and I only sold 200 books. And of course, for that person, that might actually be a low for them and they are struggling. Whereas like, I'm like, wow, I only sold 6 books and I'm feeling this immense pressure to sell more. And then there are people who are like, well, I didn't sell any books this month. And so I think we're all at like different stages of our journeys and it's really hard to, almost like cope with the fact that you are not going to sell as many books as your little heart hopes and you have all this like love that you've poured into your book and it can be disheartening at first to not see that translate to sales, but I do know that we have to like keep pushing and keep trying, and I think like the biggest lesson to learn is that while traditional publishers can make it happen now, we can make the same things happen, but it's just going to take a lot more time and a lot more like effort on our part, especially with marketing. But that being said, what has been the most rewarding moment of your indie author career so far?
In connections with people, I think the I think the best example of this is when I was at a book showcase at a library near me, And I was there selling my books, and then this woman comes up. I give her the spiel of the book, and then she says, "Oh, well, this sounds really good, but it's not really my genre. But I think my son would really enjoy it." And I was like, "Oh, okay, bring it over." And then she calls her son over, and like he's this really tall 18-year-old, very lanky. His shoulders were hunched. He's wearing his sweatshirt and his hoodie over his head, and like his whole demeanor is like, I'm just here because my mom dragged me out of the house. I'd rather be playing on my PlayStation right now. So he tells me to come over, and then I give him the synopsis of the book, and then his face just brightens, his shoulders pulls back, he pulls back his hoodie, he takes the book, and then he just starts turning it really fast, and then I start talking to him about the book and the context behind it, and then he just gets more and more excited, and he could not wait to pull out his wallet and buy the book. And then as soon as I give it to him, like he just says thank you so much, and then I see him go in the corner of the library, and then he just starts devouring the book left and right. And this is a thick book, and by the time I looked over, I think it was like a quarter of the way through already. So so just seeing that connection, just seeing how it can resonate with people, that was probably so far the biggest highlight of my indie journey.
Yeah, that's definitely something that makes all the hard work worthwhile because you're finally seeing it pay off. And I think that that again is like a testament to what we were just saying, that it takes time to find your readers, but they are out there. And it's really interesting to see how you were first talking to his mom and she was like, well, it's just not really for me, but I know someone who might like it. And then you ended up finding someone who devoured, that much of your book in a short span of time. Clearly you found your ideal reader in that moment. And that's like the high that you have to keep chasing, is finding that ideal reader. Well, this has been a really great interview, and we're going to get to our last question here, which is, what is your best piece of advice for people who want to self-publish that you wish you would have known ahead of time?
Keep writing. That's like the long and short of it, because like I said, it took me 15 years to write this, and it's mostly because like halfway, like a quarter of the way through each draft, I would just give up because I would get to chapter 6 and be like, this doesn't make any sense. Let me just delete this whole thing. Or I would get to chapter 7 and just be like, this doesn't make sense. Let me just delete this whole thing. And it wasn't until I went to like a writing group and shared some of my work, and then I said, I don't know if I'm going to keep this. I'm going to delete it. And then they said, what are you doing? Keep writing that. I want to know what happens. So and I eventually got to the end. So for indie authors, I know it's like um difficult, especially when it feels like you're on the island by yourself, but keep writing, keep editing. Someone out there, a lot of people out there need and want to hear your stories, and they won't hear it unless you keep writing it.
That's amazing advice. That's something that I probably would have loved to hear myself when I was first starting, because before I wrote the book that I published, which is Fate's Tether, there's another book which I abandoned it like 30% in, and I was just like, well, it's not good, and I just like never picked it back up. But I did eventually write Fate's Tether, and for me that was a difficult piece, is like I've encountered that moment where you want to quit and you want to give up and you want to just like close your Word document and never open it ever again. But yeah, you have to keep writing, because the only way to get to an end product that you love is to keep writing it first off and get it done and get that first draft done. And even if the first draft is horrible to look at and it gives you massive anxiety and you start sweating and you have nightmares about it, that, editing takes time, and that's where you improve on the story. And I think you mentioning to us that you would start it over and over and like delete it, it definitely, I think, got to a point where you as well had to learn, just get the words on the page and then we can edit and then we can change things afterwards. So I'm glad that you did write it, even if it took 15 years. I'm really happy that the Kimoni Legacy is now here for us to equally devour, just like that teenager did. And I know that a lot of people are going to be really excited to read this one and all the other books that you publish in the future.
Yeah. Agreed, agreed. Yeah, I love that well, not only did you include writing, but keep editing. And some of us hate editing, but I feel like that was something that I struggled with, like before I published and before I even, thought of indie publishing, just like, no one's gonna like this piece of trash that I've already written because I write to write, and it's never gonna make it out there. Well, kiddo, you're like 18, it's fine, and it can get out there. You just, also take time and just keep the story with you and keep editing and keep, improving, as Jade said. So yeah, that does speak. So Omari, to wrap everything up, are there any future goals or upcoming events, releases? We talked about it a little bit, but anything, anywhere people can find you? Tell us about all the things.
So you can find me on Instagram at Omari_A_Richards and on TikTok at O Richards_author. My website is Omari-Richards. You can sign up to my newsletter, read a free sample of the book, and actually purchase the book directly from there. And I'm going to have an appearance at a writing conference in LA, actually, in March, I believe. So stay tuned for that. And stay tuned for the Magic and Melanin anthology and book 2 and my Black Mermaid story. Whenever those come out, I'll let you know.
Well, thank you so much to Omari Richards for being here with us for a fantastic interview. Next week, you'll be able to catch Michael Melisol and David Tullius, co-authors of Paragon Exordium, here on the Indie Book Nerds podcast.